Welcome to the Catholic Midlife Podcast, where we're addressing the challenges and the opportunities of midlife from a uniquely Catholic perspective. Join us each week as we spark a midlife renewal and create a firm foundation for the next wonderful, exciting, awesome season of life.
Hello and welcome to the Catholic Midlife Podcast. It's great to be here with you. I'm Curtis and I'm here with Karen.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Curtis.
And we are your hosts for today. We got a note from our listener, Ryan. Clicked play on episode 17 of your podcast on validation. This is an excellent episode. I trust others have shared that with you as well. I look forward to hearing more. Just wanted to encourage and thank you. So thanks, Ryan. We are encouraged and we love hearing from our listeners and we love knowing what works for them and what's not as interesting. It's all great. We love to be in touch with you.
Yes, I'd really love to hear actually if any listeners have suggestions about things they're dealing with or topics they'd love to see us address on the podcast. We're always looking for feedback in that direction.
So we're going to continue discussing purpose.
Yes. Last week, we talked about purpose and meaning, and I just want to remind our listeners of the definition of purpose that we've been working with so far. Purpose is the deepest belief within us, where we have a profound sense of who we are, where we came from, and what we're here to do. It's a source of deep vitality and vision. And the part of this I really want to focus on today, because I think it's got a lot of layers to it, is this phrase from that definition, a profound sense of who we are. And the question that was coming to me was, what does it mean to have a sense of who you are? What do you think it means, Curtis?
Wow, Karen, it's just occurring to me that maybe we're not serious enough on this podcast. I'm sorry,
I can't help it.
It's too light and fluffy.
Oh, no. He always teases me about being too serious.
Yeah, so, holy cow. Can I say that on live podcast land? Holy cow.
That's okay.
Moo.
That's an okay phrase to say.
So, asking the question, I start thinking of all the philosophy and Aquinas and the metaphysics of man and scripture and psychology. So here's something I really want every Catholic to know. Here's what it is. So Catholics, in my opinion, do great with the spiritual life. And it's no surprise. I mean, look at what we've received in our traditions and in scripture. Catholics, they're praying the rosary, they're doing Lectio Divina, they're praying the Psalms, they're worshiping, they're going to Mass, they're frequenting the sacraments, they're receiving the Eucharist. Spiritual lives are happening, and we have relationship with God. There are other domains to your life. That's what I want everybody to remember, that in addition to your spiritual life, you have mental and emotional life, and you're a physical being that lives in the world. And so often what's happening is we're getting stuck. We're getting stuck in our brains. We're getting stuck in our spiritual realm. And all that great stuff isn't getting pushed down through the rest of our life. And it's costing us. It's costing us in our relationships and in our person.
I just have to fully agree with you, Curtis, because all of those elements you mentioned, they're so integrated in us as a unity, as a whole person. And a lot of the stuckness or the frustration or the lack of growth and transformation we experience is when those elements aren't aligning and integrating well into a whole, right? So I think the example I'm thinking of is like when you have something spiritually you want to grow in and you're really having a hard time doing that. And sometimes your block is not a spiritual block. It's a mental block. It's how you're processing things mentally. It's your thought patterns and your perceptions and interpretations. Could be an emotional block, a need for emotional healing or regulation or something integrated differently between your mental and emotional spaces. So I just fully agree. We want to totally come at our life as an integrated whole person that is striving for unity in all those aspects.
That's one thing I love about the purpose and meaning topic, because often when there's a disconnect, that can be one of the things you start to feel like, wow, this thing I'm doing, it has no meaning. What's my purpose here?
Right.
And that's telling you, hey, maybe you've got some discontinuity between these different domains of your life. Now, I'm thinking of a lady that had this terrible job. She needed the money. It was a job where the boss was kind of toxic, and she would show up and the workers were divided kind of into these cliques. And she had to go around to the different people and get them to cooperate with her so she could get trained, so she could make her emotionally unintelligent, bossy boss happy, which frankly wasn't possible, apparently.
Right.
And she's just going to have this misery. It's misery. But here's her spiritual value. Hey, I need this job. I'm an adult. I'm tough. I'm a mom. I've raised all these kids. I know how to work. I know how to suck it up. And I'm doing this. But it didn't, this work didn't use any of her natural strengths, didn't use any of her great character virtues. So she's doing the work, but it feels unpleasant. It feels meaningless. Now, fortunately, she's a woman. So she was just like, hey, I'm going to ditch this job. You know what? My personal identity isn't associated with this job. I am not my job. This job isn't working for me. I'm going to go get a new one. How about that?
It's impressive.
So I can tease my fellow males. But we know how it is, that we can get closely wrapped up around our work and our identity and our achievement and our value and all the rest of it.
So it sounds like this person you have in mind was able to pay attention to her emotional life and get some information from her emotions that something was not aligned here in terms of who she was and what she was doing.
Well, I remember it was hard for her because it took her, she kept saying, there's something wrong with me.
Oh, interesting.
But there was nothing wrong with her.
Right.
She wasn't perfect. But what was wrong was a complete mismatch between what she did well and the workplace just being overbaked with negativity.
So that makes me think of another sort of alternative definition that some people use when they talk about purpose, which is basically purpose is bringing your full authentic self to engage with what you're doing. And usually it's something that's bigger than yourself. So bringing your whole self to something that's bigger than you and making your own unique contribution.
That's more of a how-to in my mind than a definition of purpose. So how-to, do you want purpose? Well, bring your full authentic self to something that's bigger than you and make some progress.
Okay, that makes sense.
Full authentic self. That's a great phrase. I love that term. It's a little tricky though, right?
Yeah, I think it is. It can be.
Yeah, it can conjure up a lot of images of being self-indulgent or whatever. But that's not what we're talking about. Let me explain a little more. One thing that term signals when you're acting through your full authentic self is you're acting with autonomy. Autonomy. We want to live our own lives. God made us free. We have choices to make, and we want to make our choices.
Right. So could you say that then part of what it means to be living your full authentic self is to be making free and conscious choices? Is that what you mean by autonomy?
Yes, autonomy, free and conscious choice.
Okay, this is really interesting. Let's go down this direction a little bit because I'm sort of curious about drawing out this a little bit for our listeners. What is a free and conscious choice and what's not a free and conscious choice?
Well, an example of what's not is the situation where somebody's, say, living out the career that was chosen by their parents.
Right. So it's not really their choice, but they feel funneled into a certain type of career.
Yeah, so they're whatever, that maybe they step into the family business and they're doing okay with it, but they always felt like this isn't really what they would have chosen. Right.
So this is making me think of just this lovely person I knew quite a while ago, and I just, this conversation sticks with me. And she was talking about how, growing up, she just got all these messages from so many people about, well, this is how you should be, and this is what you should do, and this is what it looks like to be, whether that's good or happy or successful. And she found herself just kind of at the mercy of all these things she was trying to be. And I think the reason it's coming to me now is I remember she said at the end, I'm trying to live up to all these things and I don't even know who I am anymore. And I wonder if it's because there's this connection between who I am and making those free and conscious choices for myself.
Yeah, acting through yourself.
Right.
Interestingly, that's one of John Paul II's phrases.
Really?
For talking about acting with autonomy, is acting through yourself and proper ordering of liberty.
Wow, I really like that. I'm going to have to meditate on that a little bit because almost, I'm thinking as I'm talking, it's like your choices kind of form who you are, and then who you are forms your choices. And it's almost like there's kind of an integratedness there.
Yeah. And
that may or may not make sense.
So that can be a virtuous cycle, or it could start to go sideways.
Right.
So you're going down this certain road and you're not really making those free choices. Now, freedom, of course, is not our highest value.
Right.
There are lots of reasons you could do things that you don't really want to, especially if you happen to be an adult.
Right.
And we understand that. And our listeners, of course, understand that.
Of course.
So autonomy, it's very important. We want to know that we're living our own life. And you mentioned conscious choice. We always have choices. And making a choice is so important.
Right. Wow. I've noticed in the years that we've been coaching that we make a lot of unconscious choices.
Well, we do. An example of making a choice is when my wife is doing something I don't like and I decide not to do anything about it. Well, I'm making a choice.
Right.
And so it's up to me to make it consciously and decide I'm not going to respond to whatever that behavior is. And I'll probably have a reason. This isn't the time. I have bigger priorities.
Right.
Or whatever it is. But having made the conscious choice, then we accept responsibility for it. So with autonomy, once we're consciously exercising our free choice, then we're taking responsibility for our actions. Now that's a concept Catholics can rally behind, right?
That's one we have a handle on.
Yeah, taking responsibility for your actions. And of course, that's important.
Yes. So here's something I think it means to be living your full authentic self. So, you're going through life and you're just sort of accumulating all these experiences and perspectives and interpretations. And, I think you know this, Curtis. I'm not sure if our listeners do. Our brain just takes in experiences and creates a framework of meaning around them. And then it becomes part of how we experience and interpret our life as we move through it. And sometimes those things we accumulate are really helpful perspectives, patterns, meaning makers. Sometimes they're not. And we can accumulate them almost like a boat sort of accumulates the barnacles or the whatever that hangs onto it and starts to slow it down. And part of, I think, living your full authentic self is being able to look at that and identify the things that aren't really supporting your authentic self and release them.
I love that boat image. The boat, it's in the water and there's all this stuff growing on the hull and it's got to be cleaned up. It's slowing things down. So what are some examples of this sort of patterns, thoughts, beliefs, meanings that are accumulating?
Sure. Well, here's kind of a silly example. I tried over the years to make lemon meringue pie. And they were, all of my attempts were just dismal failures. You may not remember them, Curtis, but I remember them as dismal failures. And so at one point I was just like, oh, I'm not the kind of person who makes meringue. I just don't work with egg whites. So that was a decision about who I am that, okay, really it's not that important, but it was a decision I came to about who I am and who I'm not. And we do this with much more important things over the years. I'm just not creative. I'm not smart, or I'm not smart enough to X, Y, Z. Or whatever it is, we come to think about ourselves and it's just not serving us and it's not true about who we are. But we've accumulated them and then they become part of how we move through life and experience life and really the lenses that we're looking through life at.
Karen, another example of patterns and beliefs, often it can show up around how we deal with anger.
Oh, yeah. Good one.
Because anger, it's a very powerful emotion. Mm-hmm. And we learn a lot about it in our family of origin. It's just natural. And in some families, if you're being angry, that's really bad.
Yeah.
You are being bad. Mm-hmm. And bad things happen.
Right.
And then as an adult, it's pretty natural to have some trouble expressing it when it needs to be expressed.
Sure.
And there's all kinds of signals we can learn around anger. Growing up or in school, or these messages can come from everywhere. And here's a classic case of cultural conditioning just from the culture. It's something that's in the air, and that's women's body image. Most women are not so happy with the way their body looks because there's this relentless day after day after day messaging around what women's bodies look like and what beauty looks like.
Sure. So it's pretty hard not to internalize some meaning around that.
Yeah. It's pretty hard.
How are you going to not? Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Another example, Karen, I alluded to earlier, is men and work. So as men, we are expected to be competent. And there's a tremendous pressure to be competent. And it's a good thing. And it's a good pressure and everything else. But the messaging is so strong, and I think the male disposition really latches on to that virtue as being all important and defining. And that runs so deep that it's hard for men to change gears sometimes, or we often feel like we're the one that has to solve all the problems, that nobody's going to help us, nobody's there for us, that anything less than full success won't be acceptable. And that's just an example of the kind of, I guess, what would that be, cultural. It's just some messaging that's endemic that we internalize. And not all that messaging is per se bad, but it's the type of thing that we can start to carry around that can be an obstacle to making free, conscious choices when there's something we really do want to do that would put our perceived competence at risk.
I appreciate those examples, Curtis. I think they're really helpful. And I know we're getting to the end of our time here. There's a lot more to say about all this, but I wonder if I can leave our listeners with a couple of questions that are coming to me based out of this. And the first one is, what is one thing that you really appreciate about yourself and you just know this is a really authentic part of myself? It really is part of who I am in my gifts and strengths and characteristics. And what is one thing that might be a barnacle that's just along for the ride? You picked it up somewhere. It doesn't even matter where, but it's not serving you anymore. And really, you don't need it anymore in your life. So that's for you listeners. Think about those two questions and just pick one thing is part of expressing yourself authentically, and one thing you think, this is something I don't need anymore.
Something to savor and cherish, and something to let go.
Bingo. Bingo.
I like those questions, and I just want to add that we should be encouraged. Let's be encouraged. Change is possible. We can change. Our experience of life can change. There is a great deal of potential in us. God is with us. We are capable of so much. There's so much possibility for us. And I'll just never forget being in my coaching training, deep into it, and just really understanding for the first time that I could change, that I could have a different experience in my life. And it was a very powerful and transformative moment. It is great to be here with everybody today. If the podcast is working for you, tell a friend, tell two friends. All you got to do is get on your phone, text a couple friends, that's two. Just tell them the name of the podcast, The Catholic Midlife, and they'll be able to find it. We're on all the major platforms. And we have just barely started to talk about authenticity and purpose and everything else. And we're going to keep it rolling. Be blessed, my friends. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to the Catholic Midlife podcast. It's great to be here with you. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite app or platform. Leave a review. That's so helpful so that others like you can find the podcast. And be sure to tell your friends. We'll see you next week.